My name is Steve Brady. I'm the Vice President of Institutional Advancement here at Rose-Hulman. And I want to welcome you all today to another one of our Rose Talks. We're really excited to have a lot of people who have come to see Dr. Sid Stamm give his presentation. So I'm up here speaking on behalf of the Alumni Relations team. And the Alumni Relations team at Rose is really charged with the goal of engaging all of our alumni. And this is one of our ways that we like to do it, presenting opportunities to learn something by hosting volunteer opportunities, events around the country. Of course, homecoming is coming up in October, back on campus, and lots of other events like alumni awards, which will be happening in August. So we're excited to bring this content virtually to our 18,000 alumni around the world. And tonight's feature is driven by our desire to showcase what the Rose community is doing. Sometimes we have alums, sometimes we have faculty, and tonight we have both. So we're going to be privileged to hear Dr. Sid Stamm talk about his views and ideas in cybersecurity. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started and ask Dr. Stamm to start walking virtually to the stage, and I'll give a quick introduction. So Dr. Stamm is the Associate Professor of Computer Science and Software Engineering here at Rose-Hulman. He has studied and teaches security, privacy, computer forensics, and computer systems. His research focuses on online identity theft, tracking, web and physical devices, protection measures, web security policy, and data privacy. Sid designed and implemented many of the security and privacy-related features in Firefox, including Do Not Track and content security policy, and enjoys hacking on open source projects. And I'm sure that's completely legal. He has published numerous papers on privacy and security and holds a PhD in computer science from Indiana University. When he's not in front of the computer, he's usually at the controls of an airplane or underneath a leaky, broken car with a wrench. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Stamm.
All right, thank you, Steve. Yeah, the hacking notion in my bio is different than what we're going to talk about today. That's more about like tinkering around with the kind of colloquial hacking. What we're really interested in today is cybersecurity stuff, and hacking in terms of cybersecurity kind of has its own definition. So that's what we're going to focus on for what I want to talk about today. So I'm just going to kind of get right in here. I started making these slides in PowerPoint and decided to try something that my colleague, Dr. Sriram Mohan, has done and use PowerPoint's design ideas. And it suggested this, and I think this is a really pretty title slide, but I'm super curious about what's going on in the background and whether or not there's any code flaws in the background. I didn't pick this code. PowerPoint picked this code for me. It turns out this is from a program called Blender, which is an open source project that allows you to do some modeling, right? 3D modeling. It has nothing to do with the talk, but I just wanted to point out that, you know, open source is everywhere, so this will be exciting. I want to motivate the topic of hacking a little bit by talking about a recent event from April. So in April, the Colonial Pipeline got hacked. You probably heard about this. Basically what happened is their corporate network was invaded by some ransomware gang. It sounds really, really evil. And this bad software, this ransomware that basically kind of sealed up all of their information, protected it so that they couldn't access it, locked down all their systems and deleted everything. That was deployed across a bunch of computers on their corporate network. Now, it didn't actually invade the pipeline control systems, which is good because that would be really bad. But this pipeline feeds petroleum to basically the entire East Coast. Right, it is the supply for much of the East Coast. So out of an abundance of caution, just to make sure that they wouldn't accidentally blow up the pipeline or something like that, Colonial shut it down. And it was shut down for almost 6 days. And in the end, they did end up paying the ransom for the data. So the ransomware basically said, pay us money or you'll never see your data again. They paid the ransom. It was about $4.5 million. And now it's back up and running and everything is good. Now we'll talk a little bit more about Colonial Pipeline, but this is a ransomware event where some bad software gets into your network, it locks things down and says, pay me or you can't have your stuff back. And this is becoming very, very common. In fact, more common than you see in the news. Even more recently, JBS Meat Company, which is a Brazilian-based company, that packages and sells meat and processes meat. It's the world's largest meat supplier right now. Depending on how you measure meat suppliers, it's definitely one of the top three, right? Maybe you've heard of Pilgrim's Pride Chicken. That's their brand, right? They produce about a fifth of the U.S. meat supply. On June 1st of just a few weeks ago, their corporate network was also hacked, right? Just like Colonial Pipeline. This was a different ransomware gang, right? So a different group of people. They're called the R-Evil gang. And there were reports that because of the infection, the plants were unable to complete even basic tasks like weighing things, sharpening knives, clocking in employees. And as a result, they just shut down. They had to shut down. A lot of plants across the US and Australia, now this is a global problem, right? They shut down for a little over a day. And in the end, guess what? JBS paid the ransom to get access to their data again. This time, they claim they paid the ransom not to get their data back, but rather to make sure that the bad guys didn't distribute the data, like leak the data to anybody. They have some secrets in their data that they didn't want out, some corporate secrets. So their purpose for paying the ransom was not recovery, but rather secrecy. And they were relying on the ransomware gang to honor their word, basically say, well, we're not going to leak your data unless you pay us. Oh, well, if you pay us, excuse me. Their ransom was about $11 million, which is a big number. And these are just two events in the last quarter of the year. And these are two high-profile events, but that's a lot of money. And so it seems very lucrative that these ransomware gangs are making so much money per instance, right? There are a lot that aren't reported, they're not without warning either. Like the R-Evil gang did assert their plans to attack the U.S. agriculture industry earlier in the year, and here they are actually doing what they promised. But it happens on small scale too. These are two big scale examples. In 2019, in July 2019, the Vigo County Government Center was also hacked, right? So bad guys got software into the U.S. Into the county court system's computers. But here, the Vigo County system detected the attack internally, right? They weren't told that they had to pay a ransom. Instead, they had some monitoring software that told them some illicit software is running on their systems, and they need to shut it down, right? So this was a little bit better. It wasn't actually ransomware as far as we can tell, but it was a virus of some sort that was intentionally placed into the Vigo County court system's computers, right? Now, this attack leveraged what's called a zero-day vulnerability. A zero-day vulnerability is an undisclosed flaw in software that bad guys might use, and it hasn't been fixed yet, right? And it gets used before it's fixed. That's the zero-day thing, right? There are 0 days since it's been fixed. And that was leveraged. So it was a complete surprise attack. The county system, they couldn't have installed updates to prevent this attack, and they had a monitoring system in place, which was good, and they had backups, and they backed up their operations to paper. So they were still able to do things while they were recovering, which is good because it took them a long time to make sure everything was out of the system and everything was fine again. So they didn't pay a ransom. All it ended up doing in the end was taking down their backup server, which is pretty bad because a lot of the time, if you've got software backups of your corporate network, that's how you recover from an attack. You erase everything and start over, right? But their backup server was gone. They didn't pay a ransom, and we actually came out in pretty good shape in Vigo County. So the attackers are not discriminating. They like the high-profile targets, but they also like the low-profile targets, basically anything that will get them where they're going. So let's talk about what all of these things have in common. So we're going to talk about who hackers are, what they want, why they want it, and how they get it, and then how to kind of protect yourself, right? So the first thing that we got to talk about is hacking. What is a hacker, right? We need to kind of formalize this a little bit because, I'm a professor, I got to do that. Hacking is about gaining unauthorized access to others' technological devices without permission. So unauthorized access without permission is a little redundant, but it's really important that we realize that the access gained is without permission. So you're kind of hacking in. You can imagine like somebody comes at your front door of your house with an axe and just starts chopping away at the door until they get in. They're hacking away at the door, right? It's kind of like that. It's not as sexy as that, but it's kind of like that. So then in this case, a hacker is a person who's going to manipulate computer systems to do what they want instead of what they're supposed to do, right? So they know how to leverage flaws in computer systems, flaws in the designs of the computer systems, to do something in their favor, right? And that's really what we're talking about, is manipulating computer systems. Right, so who are they, right? Yeah, who are these people who are doing the hacking? And kind of the traditional view of what people think of when they think of a hacker. Maybe you've seen the movie from the 90s, the Hackers movie. There's a bunch of punk kids, right? Or a guy in a hoodie at a computer. This looks like it's a Mac, actually, so I don't know how many hackers use Macs for their hacking. Maybe a good number of them. But this is like old hat. At this point, hackers aren't just a guy in a hoodie. It's more like this. It's more like what you would see in an office. It is a team, a well-organized team of people working together towards a goal, right? Just like in sort of business. And they're engineering, a product. And the product in this case is access to something they're not supposed to have access to, right? They're defeating some protections. This is reminiscent of organized crime, right? It's a professional organization that's doing something. It may not be legal, but it is something they're doing together as a team, and they take a lot of what we do in the business world, in technology, and apply it to just doing something slightly different, right? And in fact, some places it's not even illegal to do the activities that we consider illegal. Our FBI may say, "Oh, you're not supposed to do that." But in some countries, there's no problem. And so they can make money outside the US borders. Right? So these are the hackers that we're really talking about. So this group of people here, it's a stock photo. These aren't actual hackers, right? It's a bunch of people, who knows what they're doing. They're probably just like posing for a picture. But we need to kind of figure out what their motivation is in order to understand how to stop them from doing things we don't want, right? So what do hackers want? If you have an idea of what hackers might want and you want to throw it out there, type it into the chat. I'm going to pause for a moment, take a drink of water. Money, I see money. What else do hackers want? And why is it a business? I mean, money makes sense. Challenge, notoriety, corporate data, access to other systems. These are all really good. I'm going to sum it up into one thing, your stuff. It's like 99% of what they want is your stuff. And about 1% of what they want is attention, right? And if they have your stuff, they can get money for it. They can get power from it. Maybe they get kicks because they can read your secrets. And they're like, oh man, the seasoning's on Kentucky Fried Chicken. Now I know the recipe. The original recipe is no longer a secret, right? That kind of stuff, right? They get their kicks. But some people just want to get a little bit of attention. And you maybe heard of the hacking group Anonymous from a while ago, a group of kind of not really organized people. They really wanted attention. They're kind of activists or hacktivists, if you want to call it that. But more commonly, they want your stuff so they can do something with it, right? So we got to ask the question, why do they want your stuff, right? There are 3 reasons I think they want your stuff. They want money, they want power, or they want fame. This is basically the same thing everyone wants. Hackers are people too, right? And we have to treat them as people too and realize their motivations are very similar to the rest of us, right? I'm going to come back to why they want your stuff in a later part where we're talking about kind of like how to protect your stuff. But just keep this in the back of your mind for now, that they want your stuff because money, power, fame, right? Same thing we all want. Maybe you don't want these things, but yeah, I think we all want them. Okay, so let's focus more on how they get your stuff, because if we can prevent this or detect it or recover from when it happens, then we don't really care why they want your stuff. It's like it's a moot point, right? So how are they going to get it? Well, your stuff is broken, right? The first reason that they can get your stuff is because something is broken about it. And that's it. There's only one bullet on this slide. It's not even a bullet. They get your stuff because your stuff is broken. But more specifically, like, it comes in 3 different ways, right? It comes from third parties. It comes from your own technology, your corporate network, your software that you're building, your product, that stuff. Or it comes from your people, right? These 3 things are the ways that the hackers are going to get your stuff. Okay, so let's start with third parties. So maybe the slide's a little small. Maybe I hope you can see the things on the left, but it's not important if you can't see the things on the left. These are things like software libraries. When you hear of supply chain, right? The supply chain is a bunch of third parties providing you your inputs for your product manufacturing, right? That's the supply chain. There's a software supply chain as well. When you start writing code in like a language like Python and you use a library that somebody else built, that's upstream, that's upchain, that comes from somebody else, and you're relying on trusting them. Contractors, vendors, this is all a third party. Maybe you've heard of this very famous third party called SolarWinds, right? SolarWinds produces a really useful network management tool, right? It basically allows you to take all the network components and information technology components you have on your corporate network from a variety of different vendors and platforms, and it rolls it up into one kind of dashboard management tool for your IT staff. It makes it really slick and easy to manage everything. You can see how everything is doing. You can update things nice and smoothly, right? It's really cool. So there's this product called Orion that rolls everything together. And in fact, it makes it so that you don't have to worry about, Apple's patch cycle, Microsoft's patch cycle, the Linux patch cycle, Cisco's patch cycle, all of your device patches cycle, because everybody's releasing software updates to fix security vulnerabilities. You can bulk deploy updates automatically using this Orion tool. Very handy. And it even updates itself, right? So this is an all-in-one kind of manage your entire network holistic tool. Super cool. This part scares me a little bit. So the hackers here noticed this. They're like, oh my gosh, okay, so if it has control over everything on your network, what if we get control of it, right? So they're looking up the supply chain. What if we get control of it? Let's see what they did, right? So what they did, according to NPR, quote, the SolarWinds attackers ran a masterclass in novel hacking techniques. They modified sealed software code, created a system that used domain names to select targets, and mimicked the Orion software communication protocols so they could hide in plain sight. This is really, really nice, colorful language for basically saying they installed a backdoor into Orion by patching Orion on SolarWinds servers so that when all of their clients installed the Orion updates in their own infrastructure, the backdoor was everywhere. It was in various government agencies. See, NASA was here, right? NASA had problems with this. The Department of Homeland Security was using this. And there were even security companies themselves that used this to monitor their IT infrastructure. And one of them noticed. One of them is like, wait a minute, this update doesn't look legitimate. What's going on? So the bad guys attacked the software update process for SolarWinds Orion, and it got distributed to everybody down the supply chain. And 100 companies in total, plus about 9 US government agencies, they were infected. A small company called Deloitte, maybe you've heard of that, was infected. There are various hospital and healthcare organizations infected. A little known cable provider, Cox Communications. Yeah, I'm being sarcastic here. Big companies, right? Really big companies were impacted by this. And the effect was that the hackers had complete access to their network. That's bad. Some of them saw ransomware, some of them didn't. SolarWinds got a lot of crap in the media for this. But this is a supply chain attack. All right, so supply chain security is really hot right now, but what about the stuff that you're making? You're a software company, or maybe you're a company that makes stuff that uses software, which is pretty much everybody nowadays, right? Unless you make food. Your food probably doesn't use software. I'm not eating a software hamburger for lunch. But the stuff that's running on your systems that you've put there, or the stuff that you're building, might be outdated. It might be flawed. It might be misconfigured. It could be as simple as not checking a box that says turn on security, right? So how good is your infrastructure? How good is your software that you're running? I'm going to go through a quick example here. I like to use Heartbleed as an example, even though it's really a third party because it's a flaw in a library that a lot of people used. But it's open source, and you could have vetted it yourself, right? And who could detect it, right? This is from April 2014. Once it was discovered, it was patched 6 days later. So the open source community fixed it really fast. But the bug had been there for 2 years by the time it was fixed, right? Which is pretty bad. This was in a product called OpenSSL. SSL is what we use for secure internet communications. The Remo.co site uses SSL. If you use a Linux-based product, or if you use like Firefox or Chrome, you are probably using something like OpenSSL. Firefox doesn't use OpenSSL. I don't remember if Chrome does. But most of the web servers out that are not Windows-based use OpenSSL. Okay, so because I'm a CSSE prof, I got to show you some code, right? So here's some code. Who can see the flaw in this code, right? If you're a programmer, can you spot the error? You know, maybe you've heard of Heartbleed before. Another reason I like to use Heartbleed is because, you know, the logo is sexy, right? I'll give you a hint, right? So the way the Heartbleed works is when you have a connection from your web browser to a web server and it's kind of long-lived, it lives for a while, the session kind of goes quiet. It's like on the telephone, when you stop talking, the other person stops talking. Every once in a while, you got to say, hey, you still there? That's what is known as a heartbeat in SSL. And the idea here is the heartbeat is you send a message, you say hello, and this is 5 characters long, 5 letters long, and then the server will repeat it back to you. It will say, hello, here are the 5 characters, right? So this is in itself interesting, but what if I say to you like hello, and that, by the way, is 512 letters long. You're going to say hello back to me, but this code says that you're going to believe that it's actually a 512 letter word, and you're going to just find whatever letters are in your head next to the word hello and spit them out. And this is how the computers work. So the computer would allocate enough space for the word hello, and then whatever's next to it in the computer's memory gets returned back to the client. The effect of this is that the client can just say hello a bunch of times and see all of the memory on a web server, including, I don't know, passwords, secret keys, all of the things that are not supposed to be disclosed. So this is bad. This is why it's a Heartbleed, right? It bleeds all of the memory. This was fixed pretty easily. Instead of just trusting the originator of the heartbeat for how long the message should be, what you do instead is you measure the message is, and you use that. You just don't trust it. So maybe trust but verify, right? So this is a pretty simple error. It's not a hard error to make, but it was catastrophic, right? Because you can leak all your secrets. This is a mistake. Let's move on, right? We all make mistakes. Just realize that they're there, right? We'll talk about how to kind of combat them in a bit, but I want to focus on how hackers get in through your people. People make mistakes. They make honest mistakes. Sometimes they need more training on how to use equipment or software. Sometimes they're lazy. Sometimes they're tired. Sometimes they're just having a bad day. Sometimes they trust people too much, right? All of this is fine. We're human, right? People also are motivated by the 3 things that the hackers are motivated by. They're motivated by money, power, and fame. So if a bad guy shows up and says, hey, I can get you rich and famous and give you control over this entire company if you give me your password, they might be a little bit tempted to release their password, right? So people are human. They have the same desires and they have the same flaws. So are hackers. They're human. They have the same desires. They have the same flaws. Keep that in mind. But also, people are not fully observant. They are focused at whatever task they are hired to do when they're working for you, and they may not notice the person looking over their shoulder at the coffee shop as they log into the VPN, right? It's a thing that's going to happen. Sometimes training helps. Sometimes technical measures help. Sometimes you need both, right? So here's an example of really small text, but this is a real world example of how somebody might get in through your people. This is an email that came out to campus, across campus a couple of years ago. Basically, it has a nice quote, and it says, I want to honor some of my colleagues here who are amazing. Go click here to view nominations. And if you click this link, it would ask for your Rose-Hulman credentials. You would log in, and then it would give you an error. Right? This wasn't legitimate. I mean, maybe your first hint should be look at the from at the very top of this. This is from Office of the President estherwilliams369@earthlink.net. At this point, I don't think James Conwell had an Earthlink email address, so that's already a little sketchy to me. Now, some email readers aren't going to show you the actual address. They will only show you the name, Office of the President. And that's what this hacker was relying on happening. It's fooling people by lying to them, by saying this is from the president when it's not actually from the president. So if you enter your credentials, then they have your password, then they can like log into the Rose VPN, and guess what? Ransomware could happen. So this is dangerous. This is a dangerous way that hackers could get in through people. Now, sometimes the people are not inside your organization. Sometimes they're just people, right? Maybe some of you have received a text message like this recently. If you live in Indiana, everybody's basically getting them at this point if you have an Indiana number. Indiana Workforce Development, due to numerous fraud claims, we request you verify your identity, right? Enter your social security number, enter your name, your email address, your bank account number, your routing number, all of these things here so that we can make sure that you get unemployment, right? I mean, look at this URL. So one of the downsides of sending a text message is you can't mask the URL very easily. And this is not an Indiana website. In fact, it's not. It's a co.uk website. So I don't know. Maybe you got one of these. These are kind of fun. I deleted this, and then I got one the next day. Then I deleted that. But I'm starting to collect these URLs of websites that are running these identity harvesting services. It's basically what they are. Now, the interesting thing about this is this itself isn't necessarily the whole attack, right? This message is part of it, but the hacker already did step one, which was put their software on some unsuspecting web server. So this maaclothians.co.uk website was running a vulnerable version of WordPress, and bad guy hacked in somehow, don't know how they did it, installed this program that harvests IDs, right? So the other text messages that I got had the same end of the URL. It's the same program. It was on somebody else's server. It's kind of interesting to see how that kind of goes around. They move around as people catch them and shut them down. Okay, so here's a question for you. What is the fastest or easiest route, the route that the hackers tend to take most often? You have any ideas? Any thoughts? Type it into the chat. This has been me all year teaching students. Yeah, type it into the chat because you're not going to unmute. People, wetware, people. Okay, yeah. Basically, your people are probably the easiest route. And if it doesn't work, they can try again. And people usually won't notice a couple of times. And if it doesn't work, they can try the other stuff later, right? Technical skills and technical expertise that you need in order to find flaws in software supply chains are in high demand, which means they're in low supply for the bad guys. That's good news for us. It's bad news for us when we're trying to use the same expertise to protect ourselves, right? We can't hire the engineers to fix our stuff or to make our stuff, and they can't hire the engineers to break our stuff, so everything slows down, right? But people are always vulnerable, and hiring people who are con artists might be a little bit easier because usually lying to people is looked down upon by legitimate businesses. So your people are a big attack surface. This is what I would call an attack surface. It's a place where the bad guys try and get in. Phishing emails. They leverage trust in people. They leverage the bad passwords that people choose and flaws in the usage of passwords. So let's go back to the three things that motivate the hackers. Why they want your stuff. They want money, power, fame, right? So power is mainly like used for cyber warfare, right? They want control over something that's big. And we're seeing this is mainly nation state attacks on things like voting systems or military systems. Fame is mainly historical, and it's more about hacktivism, people who are using software to make a point. Sometimes it's political, that would be power, but also fame is something, and people want street cred so they can get hired by a hacker gang so they can do this ransomware stuff because it's more lucrative, right? So mainly, attackers nowadays, the bad guys, the hackers nowadays, are really motivated by money. It has become really lucrative, right, to find your way into somebody's system and just like take their stuff. It's theft, right? And you can offer to give it back for money, and maybe that's good enough. Maybe they're going to pay you enough money that you will give it back. And the more you give it back, the more your next victim is likely to also pay you. And that's what we have is these criminals, these cyber criminals are ransoming data, and they are playing by the rules that they set so that people trust them. And they trust them wrongfully, but they trust them enough to pay the ransom, which means they can do it again. So if people would just stop trusting them and stop paying the ransom, a lot of pain would happen, right? A lot of files would leak, a lot of things would get deleted, but eventually they'd realize they're not going to make any money this way, and they'd quit. But we've kind of lost that battle already, because millions and millions of dollars are going out the door to ransomware. It's becoming a legitimate business. And these ransomware gangs, while they run before they're caught, they act mostly legitimate. They promise to give you your data back. They're going to do that. So next time they attack you or attack somebody else, they're likely to pay. And in fact, it's so lucrative that there's this ransomware as a service idea, where there are organizations that have a ransomware software platform. They just need to deploy it onto hacked networks. So they have affiliates come in and say, hey, I know about this network over here that I can attack. I know of a 0-day we can use to break into their network. I've got some credentials. Let's use your ransomware as a service. And so they work together. So the person who comes to them, the affiliate who comes to them with knowledge about how to break in, and the ransomware as a service provider, the software provider, has the platform and the know-how, and they collect the funds and all of that. They work together to break in, steal money, and they each get a cut. This is crazy that we have multi-levels of hacking now. We have hacking as a service. If you tell me how to get in, I'll do it for you, right? And this is nuts. This is kind of what it looks like, right? This is the dark side software that was used against the Colonial Pipeline. This is what they saw when they tried to access anything on their network. You need to pay a certain amount of money. And here's how you decrypt files, and there's even a phone number you can call. This is a website that was accessed through Tor, through an Onion URL, which is an anonymous URL. This is crazy. So this is the front end. It's basically explaining how you can pay us, and you can just set the ransom to whatever you want. This does a lot. So this company called Malwarebytes that does analysis of malware, they looked at this to see what it did, and they said it encrypts all the files using a custom encryption protocol that's difficult to reverse, right? They emptied recycle bins, they uninstalled services, they deleted copies, they terminated processes. They basically wreaked havoc on your system. If you had a backup of everything, you could probably just erase everything and go back to your backup. But you have to be certain that your backup is not vulnerable to their attack, or they'll just do it again, right? So they're relying on your willingness to pay for them to go away for a little while. And that came from a third party, did it? No, this is, let's go back a little bit. This was actually, we'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how Colonial was actually hacked in a moment. This did not come through a third party, but we can talk about how you can vet your third parties. We could talk about how you use trusted libraries that you've looked at yourself to see how they work. Don't blindly assume things. If you're building software, don't just install all of the packages that do everything you need. Make sure that you install a minimum set of packages for what you need to do a job, because there might be something in there you're not using that's vulnerable to the hackers, and the hackers will get in through something you're not even using because you have it installed, right? You should use stuff that's peer-reviewed. You should use stuff that's maybe not the newest thing unless you really know what you're doing. And don't blindly assume that something you get from a supplier or a vendor is safe, right? These are just best practices. Be healthy skeptics is kind of the best way to protect yourself from third-party entries like SolarWinds. Sometimes there's not much you can do. SolarWinds prides itself on security. It even offers security products, but they got hacked, right? So sometimes even the experts get hacked. Just be ready for it in case it's going to happen. You can protect your people. You can train them. You can be patient, forgiving. just to have a contingency plan. Be ready to recover when somebody makes a mistake. People make mistakes. We all do. It's going to happen. Use checks and balances. Trust but verify. Somebody's doing a critical task. Tell them, I trust you to do this, but you might have an off day, so I'm going to just have somebody check it off to make sure you did it right. If you got 2 people checking it, now there's 2 things that the hacker has to compromise. Two people that the attacker has to compromise. And then finally, we could talk about your tech. And then this is where we're going to come back to Colonial Pipeline. But basically, there's lots of security analysis tools available. There are companies that manage your security for your network for you. There's insurance. If you're building technology, specifically if you're building software, there's a well-developed field of research on how to best cater your software development lifecycle for security without bolting it on at the end and maybe not getting it right. Gary McGraw wrote a really excellent book called Building Secure Software. It's kind of one of the canonical books on how to plug security into your entire development and engineering lifecycle to make sure that you build the right thing that's not going to fall on its face when the hackers come knock on your door, right? And you can always hire a security firm to help out, right? To look at your code, to look at your software, to look at your configuration, not even as a permanent thing, but as like a check, as an audit. And these are good kind of useful things to do. So all of this boils down to skepticism. Just be skeptical that everything you've done is perfect and double check it. Periodically go through and just make sure it's doing what you want, and have a backup, right? So I promise to come back to Colonial Pipeline, and we're going to do that. So what have we learned, right? This pipeline was infected with, well, not the pipeline, I'm sorry, their corporate network was infected with ransomware. The pipeline only had petroleum in it. The network had the ransomware in it, right? Reportedly, the ransomware group, the dark side group, they took advantage of a VPN password, a virtual private network, that did not rely on multi-factor authentication. So what this means is, for those of you who are not tech experts, they logged into Colonial Pipeline's corporate network from the internet using a password they found in a list of compromised passwords from when some passwords were compromised a long time ago. Username password combination was there, hadn't been used in a long time. It was inactive, had not been used in a long time. Password hadn't been changed in a long time either, since it was compromised. And they just used an old password and got in because there was no text sent to a phone. There was no little hardware token where they had to enter a secondary password. There was no device check. It was just, oh, you gave me the right password? Okay, here's access to the entire network, the entire corporate network. And exactly. So as Charles wrote in the chat, it was completely avoidable by doing a periodic audit of accounts and locking the ones that aren't in use, or using multi-factor authentication. A lot of us, rely on our cell phones to get a text or have a special app on here to authenticate. That stops a lot of the problems. If I have to look at something that I have when I type in and use a password, then I both have to have this and the password. Password gets leaked. It's useless by itself unless you also physically get my phone. And that stops a lot of the attackers from overseas, which is really handy. So once they got in, they gained access to all of the Office stuff that was presumably secured because it was inside VPN. And so you'd already authenticated. So you were one of us. You can just access the printer. You can access the backups. You can do whatever you wanted, except you can't get access to shut down the pipeline, which was good. So they did isolate the control system for the critical infrastructure from their general Office IT stuff. So the interesting thing here is the FBI was on this case right away because, oil, the whole East Coast, right? Big deal when you shut down the pipeline and gas prices go way up. They were on this case and they gave the dark side hacker group a lot of attention. They had received some attention in the past because they actually donated some of the ransom to charities, and the charities rejected that because it's dirty money, and they got bad press for that. So they quit doing that. And the FBI gave them more bad press. And it turns out the FBI was cooperating with some other folks, I assume. I don't know the details about this, but they were able to recover some of the ransom that was paid. They followed the money through, they followed the Bitcoins from one account to another, and they ended up in an account that they had seized and had access to. And were able to take some of that money and refund it back to Colonial Pipeline. It wasn't all of it, but they were able to give some of the ransom back, which is really interesting. I don't know how they did it yet, but they were able to recover some of that money. So Bitcoin is not, as anonymous as we would all be told. Right? So in the end, really, organized crime, which is what this is, has a new look. Right? Hackers are just organized criminals. They've got new tools. They're still looking for money, power, and fame, mainly money, right? They are still trying to be reasonably legitimate enough that people aren't instantly skeptical of them, but also streamlined and profitable just like any other business. And so unfortunately, that's where we end up. Hacking is really just organized crime that uses technology. For the most part. There are some hacktivists and other folks out there just kind of toying around with vandalism. But in general, when you hear about a pipeline going down or a meat packing plant going down, it's because there was money in it. So that's all I've got for here. I'm happy to take more questions if people have got questions or elaborate on any of these, but I hope that was a nice high-level summary of hacking.
So please join me in giving a round of applause to Dr. Sid Stamm. I think we're all a lot smarter on hacking, and some of us won't sleep well tonight. But thanks for enlightening us today with all of that. It was really exciting. So as I said, we're about to go back to the main floor. I do want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. You will be receiving a follow-up email, and it's going to have some of the information about the presentation and some contact information for our speakers if you have additional questions that come up. Don't forget, this talk will be available on our website along with all of our other Rose talks, so please feel free to check them out. Our next Rose talk will be taking place July 21st and will feature Dr. Fumi Sudahori of the Rose-Hulman Chemistry Department. And this talk is going to be going on the finer points of the chemical reactions that come from fireworks. So that's going to be really exciting. So enjoy the fireworks. Learn a little bit on the 21st. So now I'm going to go ahead and send everybody back to the floor, to your tables. So please network, get to meet other alums. Thank Matt Ellis for the best comment about Rose-Hulman being #1. And thanks again, everybody, for coming out tonight.